Jamal Carter was just 12 years old when his whole world fell apart. His mother, LaToya Carter, was the most important person in his life. She worked long hours as a nurse, always coming home tired, but still managing to smile for him. She would cook his favorite meals, check his homework, and tell him bedtime stories about heroes who never gave up, no matter how hard things got. Jamal always believed his mother was the strongest person in the world. But one morning, everything changed. His mother didn't wake up. At first, he thought she was just sleeping late because she had been so tired the night before. But when he tried shaking her, calling her name, even gently pushing her shoulder, she didn't move. A deep fear crept into his heart. He ran to his grandmother, who screamed when she saw LaToya lying so still. The ambulance came quickly. Jamal sat in the corner, watching as the paramedics worked on his mother. They pressed on her chest, checked her pulse, and called out medical terms he didn't understand. His grandmother held his hand tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. Then, after what felt like forever, one of the paramedics shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said. "She's gone." Jamal didn't believe it. How could his mother just be gone? She was fine last night. She had tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and promised they would go to the park this weekend. She couldn't just disappear like that. But the adults around him believed it. His grandmother broke down crying. The neighbors started gathering outside, whispering in hushed voices. Soon, the men in white coats came and gently carried his mother away. Jamal wanted to go with her, but they wouldn't let him. "You need to stay home, baby," his grandmother said, pulling him close. "She's in a better place now." But Jamal didn't want his mother in a better place. He wanted her here. He wanted her to wake up, to smile at him, to tell him everything was going to be okay. That night, he sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mother had always told him that miracles were real. She had said that sometimes, when things seemed hopeless, something amazing could happen. Maybe this was one of those times. Maybe there was still a way to bring her back. Then he remembered something, a conversation he had overheard between his grandmother and an old neighbor. They had been talking about a special remedy, an old forgotten cure that could bring someone back from the brink of death. His heart pounded in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Jamal couldn't stop thinking about what he had heard. His grandmother and the old neighbor had talked about someone who had once been thought dead, but came back to life after drinking a special remedy. At the time, he hadn't paid much attention, but now it felt like the most important thing in the world. If there was even a small chance that it could work, he had to try. His mother always told him that nothing was impossible. She had taught him to believe in miracles. And right now, a miracle was the only thing he needed. Jamal decided to find out more. He waited until his grandmother was busy with visitors, then sneaked outside and ran down the street to the old neighbor's house. The woman, Miss Ruth, was sitting on her porch, slowly rocking back and forth in her wooden chair. She was very old, with silver hair and deep wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and full of wisdom. Jamal hesitated, then took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Miss Ruth," he said, his voice shaking a little, "I heard you talking about a remedy, something that can wake people up." The old woman looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you asking, child?" she finally said. Jamal swallowed hard. "Because my mama is gone. But I don't think she's really gone. I think she just needs help." Miss Ruth sighed and set her cup of tea down on the table beside her. "Come here, boy," she said gently. Jamal walked closer, and Miss Ruth placed a warm, bony hand on his shoulder. "What you heard was an old story," she said. "A long time ago, there were people who knew the secrets of nature. They made medicines from herbs, plants, and roots. Some of them could do amazing things, but those ways have been lost now. Nobody uses them anymore." Jamal's heart sank. "But, do you remember how to make it?" he asked desperately. Miss Ruth studied him carefully. "You really love your mama, don't you?" Jamal nodded quickly. "She's the best person in the world." I can't let her go." The old woman sighed again and looked out at the sky, as if remembering something far away. Then she slowly nodded. "I don't know if it will work," she said, "but I do remember a recipe my grandmother once told me. It's made from special herbs and natural oils. If you really want to try, I can tell you what to do." Jamal's eyes lit up. "Yes, please tell me." Miss Ruth leaned in close and whispered the ingredients to him. Some of them were easy to find, things he had seen in his grandmother's kitchen. Others would be harder, but he didn't care. He was willing to do anything. As soon as he got the recipe, he ran home, his heart pounding. He knew what he had to do. The only question was, would it work? Jamal rushed back home, his mind racing with everything Miss Ruth had told him. He carefully repeated the list of ingredients in his head, afraid that if he forgot even one, the remedy wouldn't work. He needed to get everything exactly right. He sneaked into the kitchen, making sure his grandmother was still in the living room, talking to the guests who had come to pay their respects. He quickly searched through the cabinets, pulling out the ingredients Miss Ruth had mentioned: honey, ginger, and a special type of dried leaf that his grandmother often used in tea. His hands trembled as he placed them in a small bag. But there was one problem. There were some things he didn't have. Miss Ruth had said he needed a rare kind of bark from a certain tree and a few drops of pure oil from a special flower. Jamal had no idea where to find them. He had to go back to Miss Ruth. Slipping out of the house once more, he ran down the darkening street, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached her home, he knocked urgently on the door. She opened it, surprised to see him again so soon. "Miss Ruth, I got most of the things," he said breathlessly, "but I don't know where to find the rest." The old woman nodded, as if she had expected this. She stepped inside and came back with a small cloth bundle. When she unwrapped it, Jamal saw a tiny bottle filled with golden oil and a small piece of dark, rough tree bark. "These are the last things you need," she said, pressing them into his hands. "But Jamal, listen to me." Her voice was serious now, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "I don't know if this will work. Maybe the old stories were just that. Stories. Maybe some things in life can't be changed, no matter how much we wish they could." Jamal held the items tightly, his fingers shaking. "I have to try," he whispered. "She's my mama. If there's even a small chance, I have to do it." Miss Ruth let out a deep sigh and patted his shoulder. "Then go, child. But be careful." Jamal nodded, turned, and ran home as fast as he could. When he got back, the house was quieter now. Most of the visitors had left, and his grandmother was in her room, resting after a long, emotional day. This was his chance. He slipped into the kitchen, mixed the ingredients together, just like Miss Ruth had told him, and poured the liquid into a small bottle. He held it up to the dim light. This was it. The only thing left to do now was to get to the morgue. His heart pounded as he thought about what he was about to do. It was risky, maybe even dangerous, but nothing was going to stop him. Not now. Not when his mother was waiting for him. Jamal stood outside the hospital, his heart racing as he stared up at the tall building. It looked so normal, like any other day. But to Jamal, everything was different. Tonight, he wasn't just a scared, confused boy. Tonight, he was on a mission. He had to see his mother one last time, and nothing would stop him. The security guard at the entrance was busy chatting with a nurse. Jamal saw his chance and quickly slipped through a side door, the way he had seen others do when they were visiting patients. His hands were shaking, and his mind kept racing. What if someone saw him? What if they stopped him? But he pushed those thoughts aside. His mother was inside, lying in the morgue. That's all that mattered. He quietly made his way down the empty hallways, each step echoing in the silence of the night. He had memorized the way to the morgue from the time he'd walked past it with his grandmother. This wasn't a place for children, and he knew he shouldn't be here. But there was no turning back now. Jamal reached the door. He took a deep breath before pushing it open. Inside, the cold air hit him immediately, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. There were metal drawers lined up against the walls, each one holding someone's body. Jamal felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't allow himself to feel afraid. His mother had to be here. He moved quickly but carefully, searching each drawer. His breath came faster as he felt his mother's presence. Then, in the far corner, he saw the drawer he had been looking for, the one with her name on it, Latoya Carter. Jamal froze for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He had imagined this moment over and over, but now that it was real, he felt the weight of it all. The reality of her being gone, the pain of not being able to hug her again, the fear of what might happen next. But he couldn't back out now. He opened the drawer carefully and looked at his mother's body. She was still, her face peaceful. She looked like she was simply asleep. Her skin was cold to the touch, and a sadness flooded Jamal's heart. He missed her more than he could put into words. But this wasn't just about saying goodbye. This was about trying, even if it seemed impossible. He took the small bottle from his pocket, holding it gently in his hands. His fingers trembled as he unscrewed the cap. The liquid inside smelled strong, like a mixture of herbs and something sweet. Jamal looked at his mother one more time. "Please, Mama," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Come back to me." He poured the liquid carefully into her mouth, hoping, praying that this would work. He kept his eyes on her face, watching for any sign of movement, any sign that she was coming back to life. But nothing happened. The silence in the room felt even heavier now. Jamal's heart sank. He couldn't bear it. He wanted to scream, to shake her awake, to tell her everything would be okay. But he couldn't. And then, something strange happened. Jamal felt a sudden warmth. It wasn't from the lights or from the morgue room. It was from his mother's body. The room seemed to shift, just slightly. Jamal's heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't enough. She didn't move. The hope in his chest flickered but didn't go out. Maybe, just maybe, he had done enough. Jamal sat beside his mother's body, his heart racing as he stared at her face. He didn't know what to think anymore. He had done everything he could. He followed the recipe. He believed with all his heart that it would work, but nothing happened. He waited, watched, hoping for a sign that she was coming back to him. But the room remained still, cold, and silent. He shook his head, fighting back tears. Maybe it was too late. Maybe the world didn't work like the stories he had heard. Maybe his mother was really gone, and nothing could bring her back. But just as he was about to give up, he heard a sound. A faint noise, almost like a breath. Jamal blinked and looked up quickly, his eyes wide. Was it her? Had she? He waited, listening. For a moment, the room was still again. But then, he heard it once more, this time clearer. A soft, shallow breath. Jamal's heart leaped in his chest. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch his mother's arm, trying to steady himself. She felt warm to the touch, warmer than before. His mind raced. Could it really be happening? Was she waking up? He leaned closer, his eyes fixed on her face. He could see her chest moving, ever so slightly, as if she was taking small breaths. A spark of hope lit inside him. He held his breath, waiting for something more, something bigger. But time passed, and nothing changed. She didn't open her eyes, didn't sit up. She just kept breathing, shallow and soft. Jamal didn't know what to make of it. Was this a sign that the remedy was working? Or was it just his imagination, desperately wanting to see something that wasn't there? He looked around the room. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, and the quiet hum of the lights above only added to the stillness. His eyes returned to his mother. "I'm here, Mama," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I'm not leaving you. I won't give up on you." Still, his mother didn't stir. The minutes dragged on, and Jamal's mind began to race again. What if he hadn't done enough? What if the remedy wasn't the right one? What if there was something he had missed? He clenched his fists, frustration and sadness threatening to overtake him. Just then, the door to the morgue swung open. Jamal's heart stopped. He quickly turned around, panicked, as two hospital staff members entered the room. They didn't notice him immediately, but when they did, their eyes widened in surprise. "What are you doing here?" one of the workers asked, his voice stern. Jamal's mind went blank for a moment, but then he found his voice. I couldn't leave her," he said quietly, his voice cracking. "I needed to stay with my mom." The workers exchanged concerned glances. One of them stepped closer, his expression softening. "Son, you shouldn't be here. You need to leave now," the other said gently. Jamal shook his head, refusing to move. "Please, just give her a chance. Just a little longer." The workers hesitated, but before they could say anything more, there was a sudden movement. His mother's hand twitched. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. This time, it wasn't a trick of his imagination. He saw it clearly. Her fingers flexed, and she let out a soft gasp, as though waking from a long, deep sleep. Hope filled Jamal's heart. His mother was coming back. Jamal's heart raced as he watched his mother's hand move. The hospital workers, who had been prepared to ask him to leave, froze as they saw the unbelievable sight. The air in the morgue seemed to change, becoming heavier, filled with something almost like energy, something Jamal hadn't felt before. His mother's fingers twitched again, and she let out another soft breath. Jamal could hardly believe what he was seeing. He had expected something, maybe a miracle, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. The tears that had been threatening to fall all night now came rushing out. His mother was coming back. He hadn't been wrong. One of the workers, a woman, stepped forward cautiously. "Son, what did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Jamal didn't know how to explain. I gave her something, a remedy. I didn't want to lose her. I thought, maybe this could help." The woman's expression softened as she looked at him, then at his mother. But before she could speak, his mother's eyes fluttered open. It was so sudden that Jamal gasped, stumbling back in shock. His mother's eyes were wide, unfocused at first, as though she was trying to make sense of what was happening. She blinked slowly, then slowly turned her head, her gaze landing on Jamal. "Mama," Jamal cried out, rushing to her side. Latoya's lips moved, but no words came out at first. Her breath was shallow, weak, but Jamal didn't care. She was alive. That was all that mattered. "Jamal." His mother's voice was barely a whisper, but hearing it made his heart swell. "Jamal, is that you?" Tears streamed down Jamal's face as he nodded frantically. "It's me, Mama. You're back. You're really back." Latoya's hand reached up, trembling, and Jamal took it in both of his, feeling the warmth return to her skin. The hospital workers watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. For a moment, Jamal forgot about everything. The fear, the doubt, the risk he had taken to get here. All that mattered was that his mother was alive, and they were together again. But as his mother tried to sit up, she winced and groaned softly. "What happened?" she asked, her voice still weak. Jamal's mind raced. He knew the truth, but he didn't want to scare her. You were really sick, Mama. But I didn't give up on you. I believed you could come back, and I found a way to help you." Latoya's eyes searched his face, confusion crossing her features. "A way." She tried to sit up further but stopped when a wave of dizziness hit her. Jamal gently helped her lean back, his hand steady and warm against her. "You've been gone for a while, Mama," Jamal whispered. "But it's okay now. You're here. You're alive." Latoya closed her eyes, the effort to stay awake clearly taking its toll on her. "I don't understand. What happened to me? Why am I here?" Before Jamal could answer, the hospital workers moved in. One of them stepped forward to check her vitals, gently but firmly moving Jamal aside. "She needs medical attention," he said, his tone serious. We need to get her back to a proper room." But Jamal couldn't let go. He stayed close to his mother, his hand on hers. "She's not going anywhere," he insisted. The workers exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed. But as they looked at Latoya, who was beginning to show signs of waking up more fully, they seemed to realize that something truly extraordinary had happened. The hospital workers moved quickly to get Latoya stabilized, but Jamal stayed close to her side the entire time. He couldn't bring himself to leave her, not even for a moment. Every time the nurses and doctors checked her vitals, Jamal couldn't help but feel a rush of relief. His mother was alive. She was breathing, her heartbeat steady. But the doctors were still confused. "This isn't possible," one of the doctors said under his breath, staring at the readings on the monitor. "She was dead. There's no explanation for this." Jamal could hear the uncertainty in their voices, but all he cared about was that his mother was there with him. He held her hand tightly, reassuring her whenever she seemed confused or scared. "Mama, you're safe now. You're here with me," Jamal whispered, brushing her hair back from her face. Latoya's eyes were heavy, and she struggled to keep them open. "I don't understand," she murmured. "I remember being so tired. Then, nothing. Everything was dark." Jamal's heart ached for her. He wanted to explain everything, but the words seemed too difficult to find. "You were really sick, Mama, but I didn't give up on you. I found a way. I gave you something." Latoya blinked, trying to focus on his face. "What do you mean, Jamal?" Jamal hesitated, unsure of how to explain what he had done. He didn't want her to think he had done something wrong, even if it felt like a miracle. "I found a remedy," he said softly. "I didn't want to lose you, Mama. I thought, maybe if I tried, you could come back. And you did." Latoya's expression softened, but there was still a trace of confusion in her eyes. "A remedy? Jamal, what are you talking about?" Before Jamal could explain further, the hospital staff began to ask more questions, running tests and making notes on their clipboards. They tried to ask Latoya what she remembered, but she seemed so disoriented, as if everything felt like a blur. Jamal stayed by her side, answering their questions the best he could. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. All that mattered was that his mother was alive. Hours passed, and the hospital workers ran more tests. Jamal barely moved from his mother's side. He couldn't believe her. After what felt like an eternity, one of the doctors came into the room with a serious expression. "We've never seen anything like this," the doctor said. Her heart stopped for over an hour. "There's no scientific explanation for what's happened, but she seems to be recovering. She's alive." Jamal let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He didn't know what the doctor's words meant exactly, but it didn't matter. His mother was alive. That was all that mattered. Latoya's condition began to improve over the next few days. She was still weak, still confused at times, but each day she grew stronger. She started asking more questions about what had happened, and Jamal did his best to explain, though he still didn't have all the answers. He didn't understand how it had worked, only that it had. As the days went by, Jamal stayed by his mother's side, helping her with everything. He would never let her go again. No matter how hard things had been, no matter how close he had come to losing her, Jamal knew now that anything was possible. He believed in miracles. He believed in the impossible. And most of all, he believed in the love he had for his mother, a love that, in the end, had brought her back to him. In the weeks that followed, Latoya's recovery seemed nothing short of miraculous. She grew stronger with each passing day, her body regaining its strength, and the confusion that had clouded her mind began to lift. Jamal stayed by her side, watching over her, helping her with the small things, getting her water, making sure she took her medicine, and always offering words of encouragement when she needed them. At first, Latoya couldn't fully understand what had happened to her. She remembered falling ill, being weak, and then suddenly everything had gone dark. She couldn't recall the moments before she woke up in the hospital, with Jamal holding her hand. But Jamal was patient. He would tell her the story again and again, each time with a little more detail. He explained how desperate he had felt after she passed, how he couldn't accept that she was really gone, how he had found Miss Ruth's remedy, and made the decision to try. His mother listened carefully, though she often asked the same questions. Jamal didn't mind. He understood. She had been through so much, and even though she was back with him, there were still many things that didn't make sense. One evening, after LaToya had gotten out of the hospital and returned home, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. LaToya turned to her son, her eyes full of gratitude. "Jamal, I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "What you did, it's something I'll never be able to fully understand. But I know that I owe you my life." Jamal shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Mama. I just couldn't let go. I couldn't lose you." LaToya reached over and gently took his hand in hers. "You're stronger than I could ever have imagined, Jamal. I never realized how much you cared for me, how far you would go for me. You saved me. You brought me back." Jamal looked at her, his heart full of emotion. "You're my everything, Mama. I would do anything for you. I had to try. I had to believe it was possible." LaToya smiled, her tired eyes shining with tears. "And I'm so thankful that you did." As the days went by, their bond grew even stronger. LaToya began to tell Jamal stories about her own childhood, about the things she had learned growing up, and about the way she had always dreamed of giving Jamal the best life possible. Jamal listened to each story carefully, savoring the time they now had together. It was more than he had ever expected. LaToya's strength returned slowly but surely. She went back to her job and started taking better care of herself, knowing that Jamal's love and faith had brought her through the darkest time in her life. And although the doctors had no explanation for her return, Jamal knew in his heart that it was the love and hope he had carried with him all those years that had made it possible. The town would eventually talk, as towns do, but to Jamal, none of that mattered. What mattered was that his mother was alive, and he had done the impossible to bring her back. Jamal had never imagined that his journey would end like this, his mother back in his life, healthy and whole again. He knew that no matter what happened in the future, nothing could ever break the bond they shared. Together, they had faced the impossible and come out stronger. And with that strength, they knew they could face whatever life had in store for them, hand in hand.